I started to involve in human rights maybe first 90s. In 90s, we established an international committee within the framework of İzmir Bar Association, and then we established the first Human Rights Center in 1996, and I became the director of the center. And this is how I started to involve. And then I went to London and I worked for Kurdish Human Rights Project 1997, 1998, and I continued to give them legal consultancy when I came back in 1999 and onwards to handle their cases that like as if something is happening in Izmir and something different happening in Istanbul, etc. But when I started to look at the picture, okay, you are bringing me some individual problems, but these problems are not individual, and we need a strategic outlook or strategic approach to deal with all this matter. And then I became a legal consultant of all Protestant community in Turkey. I mean, Turkish Protestants. They have an umbrella organization which is called the Allies of Turkish Protestant Churches, which is not legally recognized. First of all, as you know, there was this deliberately created ambiguity in relation to their legal status. But no one, of course, would understand this. They all ask me same questions. How can I set up a church? How, what are the requirements of obtaining permission for worship, etc., etc. But there were no answers to these questions. And it was so difficult for me at the beginning to explain them. They didn't understand. I said, there is a huge gap here, which was created on purpose by deep state elements, by Turkish state traditions, etc. Because Turkey has a tradition of excluding non-Muslims. And this is a part of this. Don't take it personally. Turkey has a very deep-rooted policy on this. And it was, I think, this was the most difficult part for me to explain them. This huge legal gap. Foreigners, Turkish Protestants, they kept all asking the same question. How can I establish a church? What are the legal requirements? I said, there is no legal requirement. It was so difficult. I mean, and I was trying to explain them by using some metaphors, etc. I said, you are living in a Kafkaesque world here. Something. So, because it was so difficult, especially to explain the foreigners, Americans, Europeans, etc. They never could understand this. There was even no mention of church in Turkish legal instruments. And then I decided to prepare a report on this. There was no, before this, and I prepared it, I think it was 2002 or 2003, there was no report about the situation of non-Muslims whatsoever before this. So it created a kind of shock, because I after preparing this report, I talked to some ministers, and he said, are you the guy? We fed up with this report, everyone putting exactly the same report on before us. And in this report, I tried to explain this legal gap. And I believe it created a kind of effect. I believe it has some influence in the amendments, because I also attracted the attention of European Union. Christians had all kind of problems. Their congregations, I mean, even police raided a couple of times during the worship places. They were regarded as completely illegal structure. They were treated like criminals. They were taken, for example, in 2000 something, the Protestant community of Karataş Church in Izmir were taken into custody. They were taken into the anti-terror department. They were treated like terrorists. I mean, it was the mentality, etc. Missionary activities has always been regarded as a kind of serious crime in Turkey. There is no such crime in Turkish legal system. There is no legal provision which punish missionary activities in Turkish penal code, but people were taken into custody for this across the country, and gendarmerie intelligence interrogated them. I think it was the first time the Protestant community heard the name of Jitem, because some interrogators introduced themselves as members of Jitem. They were taken into custody, and then they were put a lot of questions, etc. But gendarmerie officials, of course, knew that missionary activity they were distributing Bibles in Kemalpaşa district of Izmir. But missionary activity is not a crime under Turkish legal system. So they produced a new crime. They forced 3 villagers to say to the prosecutor that they insulted Islam. And on this statement, they were taken into custody, they were taken to the court, and they were put in prison. And they stayed in prison 1 month until the first hearing, in which these villagers came forward before the court, and they said we were forced to give these false statements, and they were set free. It started in 2006 in Trabzon. Father Santoro killed, but no one, including myself, understood that was something was unfolding. We couldn't understand. We haven't paid attention because it seemed to us that there was this extremely nationalist youngsters who was 16 years old at the time of the incident, who shot Santoro from behind. But then, when Hrant Dink was killed in January 19, 2007, it was a serious blow for myself, because Hrant Dink was such a symbol for me. I was thinking something like this: okay, there might be Turkish democracy might be so backward, freedom of expression might be problematic. There might be this fascist deep state, etc. But a person like Hrant Dink could talk in this country. He could travel, he can talk. So in this sense, he was a symbol for myself. He was a kind of a symbol for my attachment to this country. I mean, okay, I kept myself before, okay, there might be so much terrible things, but a person like Hrant Dink, he's a huge symbol. He's talking. When I heard that he was killed, I felt something broken. I mean, something which tied myself to this country emotionally. Something broken. It was a huge, devastating emotional blow for myself. And then, 3 months later, on 18th April 2007, I heard 3 Christians killed. I didn't hear Necati's name. It was not clear. They said there was a barbaric act in Malatya, and Christians were traveling there. And then I started to get some details, and I heard Necati's names. Necati was my personal client, and I took his case, this Kemalpaşa incident, even to the European Court of Human Rights. So it was so difficult to accommodate this feeling. It was so devastating. But then I decided that I should go to Malatya. I should try to help people. I went to Malatya. Almost all leaders of Protestant community were there. They were so devastated. No one knew what to do. That night I said, I forced myself to write something. I wrote a press release because I thought a message should be given to public. And then the other day, one of the leaders, Mr. Ihsan Özbek, read out this press release. And unfortunately, we got a terrible reaction from our Prime Minister exactly that night. He said their press release was provocative. I was just trying to emphasize this culture of intolerance, this stigmatization which leads to this murders. But unfortunately, we got a reaction from Prime Minister, and it was, for me, it was an ironic incident because I was also one of the legal assistants of Prime Minister when he was going to prison. He contacted me. I think it was in 1999. He was the mayor of Istanbul. You know, he cited this poem in somewhere, and prosecutors pressed charges, etc. He invited me to consult, and I was ready to give him my legal services. But then he changed his mind, and he didn't go to European Court of Human Rights. Anyway, so then I got this file. I started to work on it, and when I started to look at some details, I grew suspicious, because first it appeared that 5 youngsters were angry with these Protestants and they decided to punish them. But when I look at the details, I was not convinced with this. And then I started to look at this Hrant case, this Santor, etc., and I felt there was a connection between them. The profile of the murderers were exactly the same. They were all youngsters, they were ultra-nationalists, they had all these ties with ultra-nationalist organizations. I contacted with the Protestant community. I said, I think this is a huge case. I cannot handle on my own. I will not get any money from you, but I need the assistance of lawyers who have different backgrounds, you know, different abilities, etc., etc. All I want you just to create a pool and collect some money, because it will be expensive. This travel expensive, hotel expensive, and they did. They created a pool, and then I invited almost 25 lawyers from different cities, because I wanted to create a common eye to see all these commonalities between different cases. And thanks to people, very talented lawyers came and joined our ranks, and we started to work on the case. And then, as soon as I did this, the shadow behind the murder started to move, started to show itself. And then I became a legal consultant of all Protestant community in Turkey. I mean, Turkish Protestants. They have an umbrella organization which is called the Allies of Turkish Protestant Churches, which is not legally recognized. First of all, as you know, there were rumors to handle their cases, like as if something is happening in Izmir and something different happening in Istanbul, etc. But when I started to look at the picture, okay, you are bringing me some individual problems, but these problems are not individual, and we need a strategic outlook or strategic approach to deal with all this center in 1996, and I became the director of the center. And this is how I started to involve. And then I went to London, and I worked for Kurdish Human Rights Project, 1997, 1998, and I continued to give them legal consultancy when I came back in 1999. And was this deliberately created ambiguity in relation to their legal status. But no one, of course, would understand this. They all ask me same questions. How can I set up a church? How, what are the requirements of obtaining permission for worship? I started to involve in human rights maybe first 90s. We established an international committee within the framework of İzmir Bar Association, and then we established the first human rights